Hi, today I'm going to talk about Mount Vernon. It's not a public history site most people think of as far as being a good source of primary and secondary source material that's free, but it really is. It's located about 15 minutes south of Washington, D.C., very close to Alexandria. It's open 365 days a year, so if you want to go on a holiday, you can do that. It does cost to enter and tour the museum because it is an indoor and outdoor museum. It offers a military discount, which I took advantage of, and there are other specials that they have. The museum exhibits change several times a year, and what I would like to talk about first of all is the fact that it was in near ruin in 1853, and Miss Louisa Bird Cunningham wrote a letter to her daughter, Pamela Cunningham. They both lived in South Carolina. Mrs. Cunningham had toured parts of Virginia and saw the dilapidated state that Mount Vernon was in, and in her letter to her daughter, she said, "If men of America have seen fit to allow the home of its most respected hero go to ruin, why can't the women of America save it?" And both of these women went on a campaign to organize themselves into the Mount Vernon Ladies Association of the Union to save the property. They solicited donations from all over the country at that time, raising over $200,000 in 5 years to save the property. It officially opened in March of 1860, and it has been a privately owned foundation ever since, completely run by women, which I think is really spectacular in itself. They don't accept money from any government entities, federal, state, or local. They operate only on donations from corporations, individuals, things like that. So, to talk about Mount Vernon, it's an American landmark, a tribute to the first president of the United States, and we all know that George Washington loved his home, but he spent very little time there, even more or less when he became commander of the colonial army. Mount Vernon is dedicated to teaching people who visit about the life and legacies of George Washington. They have resources that are designed to support further exploration into Washington's world in and out of the classroom. They also have on their website, and you can also access this if you visit Mount Vernon, some teacher resources. They use 7 methodologies to offer an authentic and diverse teaching strategy that engages student learning and helps to integrate primary source material into the classroom. The biggest thing that they do and that they focus on is place. You can learn a lot from the grounds, the gardens, the buildings. They use it as a primary source, and they can combine object analysis and images, map analysis with landscapes and buildings to draw conclusions and stimulate further inquiry. When I visited in April, they were in the process of re-stuccoing, not really stucco, they were repainting all the buildings because they are not stone as it may appear from pictures. You think that the building is made out of cut stone. This was a process where they beveled panels of wood. It has a wood exterior, then they mixed sand with paint, and they painted that on the buildings, which gave it the appearance of being stone when it really wasn't. Washington was very, very ingenious in the fact that he wanted people who approached Mount Vernon to think that he had more wealth than he actually had. So that was one way of doing it. They also use objects as primary source material, which opens up a new discussion about things that were part of the everyday life of the Washingtons. Washington's bed, for example, is a little longer than beds of the period to accommodate his height. He was over 6'2". Most men of that period were not that tall. So his bed is a direct reflection on the fact that he needed something made for him that would accommodate his height. Martha's beautiful imported china, which you saw an example of when the video started, gives us a lesson in the global trade that was going on in the mid to late 18th century. This was imported from China. It was very expensive, which was another outward expression of Washington's wealth. People who came to visit Mount Vernon would surely have been impressed by the array of imported goods that he had throughout his household. Artifacts found through archaeological exploration give a broader understanding of the material culture. Recently, they dug up what they say are parts of wig curlers. These were made out of clay, similar to the clay that was used to make the very popular white clay pipes, which tells them that even though Washington preferred not to wear a wig, he preferred to powder and dress his own hair. People within his household, perhaps Martha or guests, were utilizing wig curlers to style and maintain their wigs, which, because of where they were found, tells archaeologists that it was the slave population of Mount Vernon that maintained the wigs of guests, visitors, and the household. So archaeological objects can be very important. These can also be found on Mount Vernon's website. You don't have to visit to look at these things. They're available for your classroom to go and look at. If you're a historian and you can't make it, you can access all these things through the internet and the computer world. They teach with documents. They have a very large collection of original documents, books, manuscripts, letters, diaries, business reports, and legal documents that Washington kept himself or are reflective of the business and everyday dealings that were going on the property. Mount Vernon's collections enhanced literary skills. Not only was Washington a military general, he was also a plantation owner and a businessman. With over 60,000 letters he wrote or received, as well as his meticulously kept farm journals and notes, historians can get a complete look at everything that occurred at Mount Vernon. He had 2 farms. He also owned a distillery, and he had a fishery, so it was a pretty busy place. They also reflect the man, his thoughts, actions, and observations about the people he knew and the world he lived in. He wrote a lot about the people that visited him. He wrote about the people that lived on the plantation. That included the slave population, that included his grandchildren, and his adopted children. They teach with images. Washington was an avid collector of art, and he, as we all know, sat for multiple portraits. As well as being a surveyor, he liked to collect maps. So they have a very large map collection, not only of Mount Vernon and the area around it, but other places that Washington was interested in. People would send him maps or surveys, and he enjoyed looking at those and commenting on them. So all of these items can give a historian a picture of exactly what Washington was seeing at the time that he was alive. And again, we don't necessarily have to visit Mount Vernon to access these things. The Extraordinary Research Library contains pieces that are invaluable to understanding the life of George Washington. Again, books, manuscripts, archives, serials, research databases, microfilm, audiovisual material, and maps are all included in their wonderful research library. And these are available to any historian or researcher. All you have to do is call and make an appointment, and they will make sure that you have access to whatever you need to be able to research Washington and his home. It is also a wonderful place for secondary sources. They claim to have every book, manuscript, everything that's ever been written or published on Washington, the Revolutionary War, and Mount Vernon, they claim to have in their collection. So I'm quite sure that it's either digitized or it's a physical book or manuscript that's on the property. So it's got lots of materials about the Washingtons themselves, the founding era and the early republic, as well as Washington's service as commander of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. And again, most of the collections are digitized, so there are lots of opportunities for you to access them. So I really enjoyed my visit to Mount Vernon. It was more than I expected. I kind of thought that it would be a tourist trap, and when I was there, I was surprised at all the resources that were available just for somebody who's visiting for the day. The museums were wonderful. The collections change. You can learn a lot just by going through their galleries and their museum exhibits, and learn plenty about what happened during George Washington's lifetime. They have wonderful theaters that show movies on a rotating basis and videos that help familiarize visitors, historians, and researchers with things that are either ongoing at the property or documentaries that talk about what Washington did when he was at war and when he was at home. So I think in the scope of things, this is probably one of my favorite public history sites that I've ever visited, and I was only able to spend a day there. You could very well spend 3 or 4 and still not get everything that's available to you to give a better understanding of Washington and the period of time that he lived in. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Excuse my dog. I think he wants to be a Hollywood movie star. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.